Standing before the Talent Week sign-up board, Sophie, an impoverished black girl whose only hope was winning the prize money for her mother's medication, was suddenly ambushed by a group of contestants who mocked her, even filming the bullying to post in the class group chat. Clutching her registration form, she ignored the cruel taunts about her threadbare shirt and worn-out shoes, quietly committing to secret practice sessions with Miss Harper, the only music teacher who believed in her voice. That dedication allowed her to take the stage and shine, unaware that an audience member's reaction was about to change her life forever. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. Sophie Lane stood in the backstage hallway staring at the bulletin board. Her name was there, printed in plain black ink. Sophie Lane, vocal performance. Wait, Sophie Lane is performing. Madison's voice cut through the noise. In what, that same wrinkled shirt she wears every week? Sophie's fingers tightened around her registration paper. She didn't look up. I mean, this is Talent Week. Chloe joined in, laughing. Everyone's wearing their best dresses. She doesn't even have, proper clothes. Sophie glanced down at her white blouse. Mom had ironed it this morning, pressed it so carefully, but the fabric had faded to cream and the collar was fraying at the edges. Her jeans had a neat patch at the knee. Her yellow sneakers were scrubbed clean but still worn. It was the best she had. Poor thing probably thinks this is just another school day. Emma's voice dripped fake concern. Someone should tell her this is a real show. The words hit hard. Sophie felt them settle in her chest, cold and heavy, but she didn't cry. She'd promised herself that morning no tears. Not today. Madison stepped closer to the bulletin board, her pink sequin dress catching the light. Oh my God, she's actually registered to sing. What's she gonna do, perform in her bakery uniform? Chloe snorted. Sophie's face burned. She thought about the flour dust that stuck to her sleeves, the smell of bread that followed her everywhere. Maybe she borrowed something from Goodwill, Emma said. The three of them laughed, not loud, just loud enough for Sophie to hear every word. Sophie! Miss Harper appeared at the end of the hallway, carrying sheet music. When she saw Sophie standing there, small and quiet, her expression softened. Are you ready? Sophie nodded. Her throat was too tight to speak. Ready to embarrass herself, you mean? Madison's tone was casual, like discussing the weather. Miss Harper's jaw tightened. Miss Bennett, don't you have your own rehearsal to prepare for? Madison smiled, sweet and poisonous. Of course. We were just wishing Sophie good luck. The three girls walked away, their laughter trailing behind them. Sophie stood frozen, the paper crumpling in her sweating palms. Don't listen to them, Miss Harper said quietly. They're not wrong, though. Sophie's voice came out small. I don't look like I belong here. Miss Harper set down her music and gripped Sophie's shoulders. This isn't a fashion show. It's Talent Week. You earned your spot with your voice. That's what matters. What if I freeze up there? You won't. Miss Harper's voice was firm. I've heard you sing. You're going to show everyone what real music sounds like. Sophie swallowed hard. Okay. They walked toward the auditorium. Through the open doors, Sophie could see the empty stage. In 2 days, she'd be standing there. In 2 days, everyone would be watching. Miss Harper. Sophie stopped. Why do they hate me so much? Miss Harper was quiet for a moment. They don't hate you. They're scared of you. Scared of me. Madison can buy a beautiful dress and pay for voice lessons, but she can't buy what you have. Miss Harper gestured toward the auditorium. She can't buy the way your voice makes people feel. That terrifies her. Sophie had never thought of it that way. The auditorium was chaos. Students practicing everywhere. Guitar feedback screeching. Madison sat front row with Chloe and Emma, heads bent together, whispering. Sophie walked down the center aisle. Every eye turned toward her. Whispers started a low buzz of judgment. She climbed onto the stage. Her sneakers squeaked against the wood. Madison smirked. Emma pointed her phone camera. Chloe raised an eyebrow. Sophie's hands started shaking. Whenever you're ready, Miss Harper said from beside the piano. Sophie closed her eyes. She thought about this morning, waking at 5 a.m., hearing Mom cough in the next room, Mom ironing her blouse with shaking hands, the prize money, $500, enough for medication. That's why she was here. She opened her mouth. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? The auditorium went silent. Not polite silence. Shocked silence. Sophie's voice cut through the air, clear and pure. Her technique wasn't perfect. Her breath control was shaky. She missed a note, but something in her voice made people stop. Something true. She sang the way Mom taught her, with her whole heart, like the song mattered. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Madison's smirk faltered. Sophie kept singing, eyes closed, lost in the melody. The song was about longing, about impossible tasks, about love that endured despite everything. "Remember me to one who lives there." Her voice cracked on the last line, just a little. But it wasn't a bad crack. It made the song feel real. The final note faded. 3 seconds of silence. Then Miss Harper started clapping. Principal Thompson stood up from the back row. "That was Miss Lane. That was extraordinary." Other students joined the applause. Not everyone. Madison and her friends sat perfectly still, but enough. Sophie opened her eyes, blinking against the stage lights. Her legs felt shaky. "Thank you," she whispered. Miss Harper was beaming. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." "I missed a note." "It was perfect because it was honest." Miss Harper cut her off. "Now sit down and watch the others." Sophie climbed down on wobbly legs. As she passed Madison's row, Madison stared straight ahead, jaw tight, hands clenched. For the first time all day, Sophie felt hope. Maybe this wasn't about clothes or money. Maybe it was just about the music. She found a seat in the back. The next performer did ballet to Swan Lake, technically perfect, but somehow empty. The girl danced like she was checking boxes, not feeling the music. When rehearsal ended, Sophie headed for the exit. "Sophie, wait." Miss Harper caught up in the parking lot. Sophie turned. "I need you to understand something." Miss Harper's voice was intense. "Performance night. This will happen again. People will underestimate you. They'll look at your clothes and assume you don't belong." Sophie's heart sank. "So, what do I do?" "The same thing you did today. You open your mouth and sing." Miss Harper's eyes were fierce. "You remind them that music doesn't care about designer dresses. Music cares about truth. And you've got truth." Sophie nodded slowly. "Your mom would be so proud," Miss Harper added softly. Sophie's throat tightened. She thought about Mom closing the bakery right now, sweeping flour with hands that shook more every week. The $500 prize waiting in the principal's office. "I hope so," Sophie whispered. She walked to the bus stop, registration paper still crumpled in her hand, and waited for the number 7. The bus pulled up 10 minutes later. Sophie climbed on, dropped her fare into the slot, and found a seat near the back. Through the window, she could see Leach Middle School getting smaller. 2 more days. 2 more days until she stood on that stage in front of everyone. 2 more days until she could win that prize money and take it home to Mom. 2 more days to prove Madison wrong. Sophie pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. In her head, she could still hear the melody of Scarborough Fair, could still feel the way the auditorium had gone quiet when she sang. Maybe Miss Harper was right. Maybe she did belong there after all. The bus turned onto rural Route 7 heading toward the trailer park. Sophie pulled the cord for her, stopped, gathered her backpack, and stepped off into the Texas heat. She had work to do. 4 months earlier, Sophie woke to the sound of coughing. Thin walls meant she heard everything, every cough, every wheeze, every labored breath from the room next to hers. 5:03 a.m. The red numbers on her alarm clock glowed in the dark. She lay still, listening. The coughing fit lasted 30 seconds, then silence. Then her mother's footsteps, slow and careful, heading toward the kitchen. Sophie threw off her blanket and followed. "Mom, you should rest." Maria Lane stood at the counter, one hand braced against the edge, the other pressed to her chest. She was already dressed for work. Faded jeans, white t-shirt, hair tied back. But her breathing was off. Short, shallow pulls of air. "I'm fine, baby." Maria straightened up, forcing a smile. "Just a little morning congestion." It wasn't congestion. It was asthma. Bad asthma that was getting worse. Sophie had seen the inhaler Mom kept hidden behind the bread box. Had seen how many times a day she used it. Had noticed it was the same inhaler from 6 months ago, the one that should have been replaced by now. "Let me help with the baking," Sophie said. "You have school." "School doesn't start for 3 hours." Maria looked at her daughter, 12 years old, too young to carry the weight she was carrying, and nodded. "Okay, thank you." They worked side by side in the small kitchen of Maria's Sunrise Bakery. The shop was connected to their trailer, just a converted garage really, but it brought in enough to keep them fed. Barely. Sophie measured flour while Maria preheated the oven. The rhythm was familiar, comforting. Mom humming while she worked the same tune she always hummed. "What's that song?" Sophie asked, though she already knew. "Scarborough Fair." Maria kneaded dough, her movements practiced and smooth. "My mother used to sing it to me. Her mother sang it to her." "Sing it now." Maria smiled. She began to sing, her voice soft and warm. "Are you going to Scarborough Fair?" "Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme." The song filled the kitchen. Sophie closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her. Her mother's voice wasn't trained, wasn't perfect, but it had something pure in it, something that made you feel safe. The song ended. Maria went back to kneading, but then the coughing started again, harder this time. She doubled over, one hand clutching the counter. "Mom." Sophie dropped the measuring cup. Maria held up her other hand. "I'm okay. I'm okay." But she wasn't. Her face had gone pale, her lips tinged blue at the edges. She fumbled for her inhaler, pressed it to her mouth, breathed deep. Once, twice, 3 times. Slowly, her breathing evened out. Sophie stood frozen, watching, scared. "I need to see the doctor," Maria said quietly, more to herself than to Sophie. "Then let's go. We can go today." "We can't afford it, honey." Maria's voice was flat. "The bakery needs every dollar to keep running, and rent is due next week." Sophie knew about rent. She'd heard Mom on the phone with Mrs. Linda, the landlord. "Just a few more days, please. I promise I'll have it." That was 2 weeks ago. They still didn't have it. "But Mom, you're breathing." "We'll be fine." Maria straightened up, smoothed her hair. "I've dealt with asthma my whole life. I know what I'm doing." She didn't, though. Sophie could see it in the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking, could hear it in the wheeze that never quite went away. That afternoon after school, Sophie went to the public library. She logged onto one of the old computers and typed into Google, "How much does asthma treatment cost?" The results made her stomach sink. $500 to $1, $200 per month for medication, doctor visits, and emergency inhaler refills. She clicked another link. Signs of severe asthma. The list included everything her mom had been showing for weeks: frequent coughing, shortness of breath, chest tightness, blue lips. Sophie's hands were shaking as she clicked back to the search bar. She didn't know what else to type. How to help Mom without money seemed too desperate, too pathetic. She logged off and walked home, her backpack heavy on her shoulders. The trailer park was quiet in the late afternoon. Rusty swing sets, abandoned bikes, sheets hanging on clotheslines. Sophie knew every crack in the sidewalk, every broken fence post. This place had been home for as long as she could remember. She climbed the 3 metal steps to their trailer and pushed open the door. Mom was on the phone in the kitchen. "Please, Mrs. Linda, just give me until Friday. I'll have it by Friday, I promise." A pause. "Yes, ma'am. I understand, thank you." Maria hung up and saw Sophie standing there. "Hey, baby, how was school?" "Fine." Sophie dropped her backpack. "Did Mrs. Linda give you more time?" "Until Friday." Maria attempted a smile. "So I just need to sell a lot of bread this week." They both knew that wouldn't happen. The bakery brought in maybe $200 on a good week. Rent was $450. Sophie went to her room, barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser, and lay down. Through the thin wall, she could hear Mom coughing again. She stared at the water-stained ceiling and thought about money, about how much they didn't have, about how Mom's breathing got worse every week, about how she felt completely helpless. 3 days later, Sophie saw the poster. It was taped to the wall outside the cafeteria, bright yellow paper with bold red letters, Talent Week. Showcase your skills. Grand prize, $500. Sophie stopped walking. $500. That was enough for medication, maybe enough for a doctor's visit too, maybe enough to buy them time. But what talent did she have? She couldn't dance, didn't play an instrument, didn't have money for costumes or props or backup tracks. She stood there staring at the poster until the bell rang for next period. That night, Mom sang while making dinner. The same song, Scarborough Fair. Her voice cracked on the high notes, interrupted by a cough, but she kept going. Sophie listened from her room, and suddenly she knew. She had Mom's song, and she had her voice. It was the only thing she had to give. The next morning, Sophie helped Mom with the baking again. They worked in comfortable silence until Sophie gathered the courage to ask, "Mom, could you teach me to sing Scarborough Fair? Like, really sing it?" Maria looked up surprised. "Of course, baby. But why?" "There's a music project at school." The lie came easily. "I want to do well." Maria wiped flour from her hands and came to sit beside Sophie at the small kitchen table. "Okay, let me tell you about the song first. She explained the lyrics, the story behind them. A young man asking his former lover to complete impossible tasks, make him a shirt without seams, find an acre of land between the saltwater and the sea strand. It's about longing, Maria said softly. About loving someone even when you know it's impossible. About hoping anyway. Sophie understood that feeling. She lived it every day, hoping they'd have enough, hoping Mom would get better, hoping things would somehow work out. Now listen, Maria sang the first verse, her voice gentle. Hear how each word matters. You're not just singing notes, you're telling a story. Sophie nodded. Try it. Sophie sang, hesitant at first. Her voice was quieter than Mom's, less confident, but it was clear. Good, Maria said. Now with more feeling. Think about someone you love, someone you'd do anything for. Sophie thought about Mom, about $500, about making things better. She sang again. This time something shifted. The notes came from deeper carried weight. When she reached, "Remember me to one who lives there," her voice didn't crack. It opened up full of longing. Maria's eyes went bright with tears. Oh, baby, that was beautiful. They practiced every night after that. Sophie would lie and say she had more work to do on the project. Maria would sit at the kitchen table, guiding her through each verse, each phrase. Don't think so much about technique, Maria would say. Just feel it. Let the song come from your heart. 2 weeks before Talent Week registration closed, Sophie made her decision. She was going to enter, she was going to sing, and she was going to win that $500 for Mom. She filled out the registration form during lunch period, her hands shaking as she wrote her name. Madison walked by, glanced at what Sophie was doing, and laughed. You're entering Talent Week seriously. Sophie didn't answer, she just kept writing. That night, she practiced in her room, with the door closed, singing so quietly Mom wouldn't hear. She didn't want to get her hopes up, didn't want to add pressure to everything else Mom was dealing with. The song became her secret, her plan, her hope. The only thing standing between her and that $500 was one performance, just one song. She could do this. She had to. Sophie handed in her registration form on a Tuesday. Miss Harper looked at it, then looked at Sophie. You're sure about this? Yes, ma'am. Have you told your mother? Sophie shook her head. I don't want her to worry. She has enough to think about. Miss Harper studied her for a long moment. Okay, but you'll need to practice. Can you stay after school on Thursdays? Yes, ma'am. Good. We'll use the music room on the 3rd floor. No one goes up there after 2:30. That's how it started. Every Thursday, Sophie climbed the stairs to the old music room while other kids headed home or to sports practice. The room smelled like dust and old sheet music. The piano was out of tune, but it was private. Miss Harper never asked why Sophie wanted to keep it secret. She just taught. You're breathing from your chest, she'd say. Breathe from here. She'd tap her diaphragm. Let the air support the sound. Sophie tried, failed, tried again. Don't force the high notes. Let them float. Sophie sang the same phrase 10 times until Miss Harper nodded. Better. Again. They worked on posture, on breath control, on letting the emotion come through without straining. Miss Harper never tried to make Sophie sound like anyone else. She just helped her sound more like herself. You have something special, Miss Harper said one afternoon. Don't try to be perfect. Perfect is boring. Be honest. Sophie didn't own a phone, couldn't look up reference tracks or watch YouTube tutorials like other kids. She just had the memory of Mom's voice and Miss Harper's guidance. It was enough. 3 weeks before the performance, Madison discovered their secret. Sophie was practicing in the music room, running through the 2nd verse, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She stopped singing. Too late. Madison appeared in the doorway with Chloe and Emma behind her. They must have followed her up. Well, well, Madison leaned against the doorframe. So this is where you hide. Sophie's face burned. She looked at Miss Harper. Girls, this is a private practice session, Miss Harper said firmly. We were just curious. Madison's smile was sharp. Wanted to see what Sophie's big talent is. She pulled out her phone. Mind if I record for moral support? Put that away, Miss Bennett. But Madison had already hit record. Sophie saw the red dot on the screen. Come on, Sophie, Madison said. Give us a preview. Or are you too scared? Sophie stood frozen. Miss Harper moved toward the door. That's enough. Leave, now. Madison lowered the phone but didn't leave. You know what's funny? You can practice all you want, but you're still going to walk out on that stage looking like you just came from cleaning houses. She glanced at Sophie's faded jeans, her worn sneakers. Some things you just can't fix. Out! Miss Harper's voice could have cut glass. The three girls left their laughter echoing down the stairwell. Sophie sat down hard on the piano bench. Her hands were shaking. "Ignore them," Miss Harper said. "She recorded me." "So what let her? When you perform on Friday, everyone will see the real thing." Miss Harper sat beside her. "Sophie, why is this so important to you? It's not just about singing, is it?" Sophie hesitated. Then quietly, "My mom needs medicine. The prize money. It could help." Miss Harper's expression softened. "Oh, honey. She won't go to the doctor because we can't afford it, but her asthma keeps getting worse. I hear her at night coughing, struggling to breathe." Sophie's voice cracked. $500 isn't much, but it's something. It could buy her medication for a while. Maybe give her time to get better. Miss Harper put an arm around Sophie's shoulders. "Then let's make sure your voice reaches every heart in that auditorium." That evening, Madison's video appeared in the 8th grade group chat. Sophie didn't see it. She didn't have a phone, but kids at school told her about it the next day. Madison had posted a clip of Sophie practicing with the caption, "Trailer Trash thinks she's Beyoncé." The video had 43 likes. Sophie found out during lunch. A girl from her math class, Rachel, who'd never spoken to her before, came up to her table. "Hey, just so you know, Madison posted a video of you singing." Sophie's stomach dropped. "What?" "Yeah, it's in the group chat. She's being really mean about it." Rachel paused. "But honestly, you sounded good. Like really good." Sophie barely heard the compliment. All she could think about was everyone watching her, judging her, laughing. She didn't eat lunch, just sat there staring at her tray. When she got home that afternoon, Mom was lying on the couch with a wet cloth over her eyes. The bakery had closed early. Never a good sign. "Mom, just a headache, baby. I'll be fine." But she wasn't fine. Her breathing was labored. Her skin looked gray. Sophie knelt beside the couch. "Mom, please, let me take you to the clinic." "With what money?" Maria's voice was tired. "Sophie, we're barely making rent. I can't spend what we don't have." "Then let me help." "I'm trying to help." Maria lifted the cloth and looked at her daughter. "What do you mean?" Sophie almost told her. Almost explained about Talent Week, about the prize money, about the plan. But Mom looked so exhausted, so worn down. "Nothing. Just let me know if you need anything." That night, Sophie lay in bed listening to Mom cough through the wall. Each cough felt like a countdown. Time running out. She had to win that money. Had to. The Thursday before Talent Week, Miss Harper called Sophie into the music room with a serious expression. "I talked to your mother." Sophie's heart stopped. "What? Why?" "Because you're 12 years old, entering a school competition, and I needed parental permission." Miss Harper held up a form. "She signed it. But Sophie, she asked me why you didn't tell her yourself." "What did you say?" "I said you wanted to surprise her." Miss Harper handed over the form. She seemed pleased, proud. Sophie took the paper, relief flooding through her. "She's not mad." "Far from it. She said she'd be there Friday night." Miss Harper paused. "She also said something else. She said she noticed you've been practicing something at home, a song she taught you." Sophie nodded. "She told me to tell you that the most important thing isn't winning. It's singing from your heart." Miss Harper smiled. "Sounds like your mom understands what really matters." Friday morning, the day of the performance, Mom woke Sophie up early. They stood together in the small kitchen, dawn light filtering through the window. Mom held something behind her back. "I have something for you." She pulled out a dress. Simple white cotton, nothing fancy, but clean and pressed and whole. "Mom, where did you—" "It was my church dress from years ago. I altered it to fit you." Maria held it up. "I know it's not what the other girls will wear, but it's perfect." Sophie took the dress, her eyes stinging. "Thank you. You're going to be beautiful up there, baby. Not because of the dress, because of who you are." They hugged tight and long. That night, Sophie hung the dress on her closet door and stared at it. Tomorrow she'd walk onto that stage in front of the whole school. Tomorrow she'd sing for the prize money that could save her mom. Tomorrow everything could change. She lay down but couldn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling, running through the lyrics in her head. "Are you going to Scarborough Fair?" Over and over until the words lost meaning and became just sound. She must have dozed off eventually because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through her window and Mom was knocking on her door. "Sophie, it's time to get ready for school. Performance day." Sophie's hands shook as she brushed her teeth. This was it. Tonight. She walked to school in a daze, barely aware of her surroundings. Kids chattered around her about Talent Week, about what everyone was wearing, who was performing what. Madison passed her in the hallway, flanked by Chloe and Emma. They were dressed up, even for school hair, perfect makeup, subtle, but there. Madison looked Sophie up and down and smirked. "Big night tonight. Ready to embarrass yourself?" Sophie met her eyes. "Ready to sing." It was the same thing she'd said at rehearsal, but this time she meant it differently. This time she wasn't just ready, she was determined. The afternoon rehearsal was mandatory for all performers. Sophie sat in the back row of the auditorium, clutching her backpack, watching as students ran through their acts one by one. Madison went first. She'd changed into her pink sequin dress, her hair styled in perfect curls. She sang Firework by Katy Perry with a backing track that was professionally mixed. Her voice was good trained, controlled, hitting all the right notes. The small audience of performers clapped politely when she finished. Chloe did a ballet routine to Swan Lake. Perfect turnout, perfect posture, every movement precise. Emma performed a cover of Roar, complete with choreography she'd clearly paid someone to teach her. One by one, the acts went on. A magic show with real props. A guitar solo that was actually impressive. A group hip-hop dance with matching outfits. Everyone had invested in their performances. Everyone looked ready. Sophie sat there in her school clothes, no props, no backup, and felt very small. "Sophie Lane, you're up next." Miss Harper called from the front. Sophie stood. Her legs felt like water. She walked down the aisle. Everyone watched. Madison whispered something to Chloe, and they both laughed. Sophie climbed the stairs to the stage. The empty auditorium suddenly felt massive. The stage lights were off for rehearsal, but she could still see every face watching her, watching and waiting to see her fail. She walked to center stage and stood there. "Whenever you're ready," Miss Harper said gently. Sophie closed her eyes. She thought about Mom that morning, pressing the white dress hand shaking from her medicine. She thought about the $500 prize. She thought about why she was doing this. Not for applause, not for recognition, for Mom. She opened her mouth and sang. "Are you going to Scarborough Fair?" No backing track, no microphone. Just her voice raw and unadorned. The auditorium went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people being respectful. The stunned quiet of people who weren't expecting what they just heard. Sophie's voice filled the space, clear and pure. She wasn't thinking about technique or hitting perfect notes. She was thinking about the words, about what they meant, about longing and hope and impossible tasks. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. In the third row, Madison had stopped whispering. She was sitting very still, her expression unreadable. Sophie kept singing. She thought about Mom teaching her the song, about late nights in their small kitchen, about how Mom's voice would crack on the high notes, but she'd keep going anyway, about how love meant singing, even when it hurt. "Remember me to one who lives there." Her voice caught slightly on the word remember, not a mistake in emotion. Something real breaking through. "She once was a true love of mine." The last note faded into silence. For 5 full seconds, no one moved. Then Miss Harper started clapping. Not the polite golf clap she'd given everyone else. Real applause, the kind that came from being genuinely moved. A few other students joined in. Hesitant at first, then stronger. Principal Thompson, sitting in the back with his clipboard, put down his pen and applauded too. Sophie opened her eyes, blinking in the dim light. Her heart was racing. Her palms were sweaty, but something inside her felt calm. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. "Sophie." Miss Harper called out, her voice thick with emotion. "That was exceptional. Thank you." Sophie nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and walked off the stage. As she passed Madison's row, she heard Chloe whisper, "Okay, that was actually really good." Madison didn't respond, just stared straight ahead. Sophie found her seat in the back and sat down. Her hands were still trembling. Rachel, the girl from math class, turned around from the row in front. "That was beautiful," she said simply. "Thanks," Sophie managed. The rehearsal continued. 2 more acts, then they were dismissed. Students scattered, heading home to prepare for the evening performance. Sophie stayed in her seat until almost everyone had left. Miss Harper approached. "You feeling okay?" "Nervous." "Good. Means you care." Miss Harper sat down beside her. "Listen to me. Tonight people are going to underestimate you. They're going to look at your dress at where you come from and make assumptions. Let them. How is that good? Because when you open your mouth and sing, when you show them what you're really made of, it'll hit them that much harder. Miss Harper's eyes were intense. You don't need to prove anything to anyone except yourself. Can you do that? Sophie thought about it. About Mom at home probably resting before tonight. About the white dress hanging in her closet. About $500. Yes, ma'am. Then go home. Rest. Eat something. And tonight you walk onto that stage and you sing like your life depends on it. Sophie went home. Mom was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked better. She'd taken her medicine, was breathing easier. How was rehearsal? She asked. Good. I think it went well. Mom turned from the stove and smiled. I know it did. I can see it in your face. They ate together, talking about small things. The bakery, school, anything except the performance looming just hours away. At 6 o'clock, they started getting ready. Sophie showered and dried her hair, put on the white dress. It fit perfectly simple and clean and honest. Mom knocked and came in. She was wearing her blue cardigan, the nice one, and had done her hair. You look beautiful, baby. You do too, Mom. They looked at each other in the mirror. Two women from a trailer park dressed in their best, about to walk into a world that didn't often make space for people like them. Are you scared? Mom asked. Terrified? Good. Means it matters. Mom put her hands on Sophie's shoulders. Remember, you're not singing to impress them. You're singing to share your heart. That's all music ever is. One heart reaching out to another. Sophie nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. Don't cry, Mom said gently. You'll mess up your face. Sophie laughed through the tears. They drove to school in Mom's old Honda, the one that made concerning noises whenever it went over 40. The parking lot was already filling up. Families in nice cars, kids in fancy outfits, everyone excited and buzzing. Sophie and Mom walked in together. The auditorium was transformed. Stage lights blazed. A curtain had been hung. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, already half full of parents and relatives. I'll find a seat, Mom said. You go backstage. And Sophie. Yeah, I'm already proud, no matter what happens tonight. Sophie hugged her mom tight, then headed backstage. The backstage area was chaos. Girls adjusting costumes, boys practicing guitar chords, Miss Harper coordinating and checking her clipboard. Madison was there in her sequin dress, getting her hair touched up by her mom. When she saw Sophie, something flickered across her face. Not quite hostility. Something more complicated. Sophie found a quiet corner and sat down. The other performers buzzed around her, excited, confident, prepared. They had costumes and props and routines that had cost money and time to perfect. Sophie had a white cotton dress and a song her mom taught her. It would have to be enough. 5 minutes to curtain, Miss Harper announced. Sophie's stomach flipped. She stood and peeked through a gap in the curtain. The auditorium was nearly full now. She scanned the crowd looking for Mom. There, back row, middle seat. Mom sat with her hands folded in her lap, wearing her blue cardigan, looking small but determined. Sophie's throat tightened. I'm doing this for you, she thought. For you. Places everyone, Miss Harper called. Madison, you're first. Sophie, you're last. Last. That meant waiting through everyone else's performance, watching them succeed, feeling her nerves build and build. She could do this. She had to do this. The house lights dimmed. The audience hushed. Principal Thompson walked onto the stage with a microphone. Welcome everyone to our annual Talent Week showcase. We have an exceptional group of performers tonight, so without further ado, let's begin. Applause filled the auditorium. Madison walked onto the stage confident and poised. The lights hit her dress, making the sequins sparkle. She was perfect. Sophie watched from the wings as Madison sang, as the audience clapped and cheered, watched Chloe's flawless ballet routine, watched Emma's energetic performance. Everyone was so good, so polished, so ready. Sophie's hands started shaking again. What was she thinking? How could her simple song compete with all this? You're up next, Miss Harper whispered. You ready? Sophie looked at her. What if I'm not good enough? Miss Harper took both of Sophie's hands in hers. Then you'll be good enough in your own way. That's all anyone can ask. Emma's performance ended to thunderous applause. Principal Thompson took the microphone. And now, our final performer of the evening. Please welcome Sophie Lane. This was it. Sophie walked onto the stage. The stage lights hit Sophie like a physical force, hot and bright and blinding. She stood center stage in her simple white dress, her hair plain, no makeup, no props. The auditorium was packed, every seat filled. Families, teachers, students, all watching her, waiting. Sophie's eyes adjusted to the light. She could see the front rows now. Madison's parents in designer clothes, Chloe's mom recording on an expensive camera, Emma's whole extended family taking up a row, and in the back, barely visible, was Mom, small and alone in her blue cardigan, hands clasped together like she was praying. A whisper rippled through the crowd. Sophie heard fragments of it. "That's the girl from the trailer park. Is she really performing in that? Where's her music?" Sophie's throat went dry. Her hands trembled at her sides. For one terrible moment, she thought she might run off the stage. Then she saw Mom stand up slightly, just an inch, and nod. A tiny movement that said, "You can do this." Sophie took a breath. She thought about why she was here. Not for the applause, not to prove anything to Madison or Chloe or anyone else. For $500. For medicine. For Mom. She opened her mouth. "Are you going to Scarborough Fair?" Her voice came out clear and strong. No backing track, no accompaniment. Just her voice filling the silent auditorium. A cappella. Raw. Honest. The whispers stopped. Sophie closed her eyes and let the song carry her. She wasn't thinking about technique or breath control or any of Miss Harper's lessons. She was just singing, the way Mom had taught her, from the heart. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. In the third row, Clara Jensen, a music director who'd come to watch her daughter play cello, sat up straighter. She'd heard 1,000 young singers. This was different. "Remember me to one who lives there." Sophie's voice swelled on the word remember. She was thinking about Mom, about early mornings in the bakery, about the sound of coughing through thin walls. "She once was a true love of mine." The second verse. Sophie opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. Really looked. Some people had tears on their faces. Others sat frozen, completely still. In the front row, Madison stared up at her with an expression Sophie couldn't quite read. "Tell her to make me a cambric shirt." The impossible tasks. Make a shirt without seams. Find land between sea and shore. Do the undoable, like trying to save your mom with just your voice. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. The melody soared. Sophie let her voice rise and fill every corner of the room. She wasn't performing anymore. She was testifying, bearing witness to love and hope and desperation, without any seam or needlework. Her voice cracked slightly, not from lack of skill, from emotion. From thinking about Mom's hands shaking as she ironed the white dress. From thinking about $500 and what it meant. "Then she'll be a true love of mine." The final verse. Sophie could feel it ending, feel the moment slipping away. She wanted to hold on to it, stretch it out, make it last. But the song had its own rhythm, its own inevitable conclusion. "Are you going to Scarborough Fair?" She sang softer now, intimate, like she was singing just to one person, to Mom. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. The last line, the last chance. "Remember me to one who lives there." Sophie's voice wavered, not a mistake truth, the kind of vulnerability you couldn't fake. "She once was a true love of mine." The final note hung in the air. Sophie held it, let it ring out pure and clear, then let it fade to nothing. Silence. Not the awkward silence of people unsure how to react, the sacred silence of people who just witnessed something real. 5 seconds. 7. 10. Then it shattered. The applause started in the back, one person standing, clapping hard and fast. Mom, on her feet before anyone else, hands together, tears streaming down her face. Then others stood, first a few, then more, then the whole auditorium rising like a wave. Standing ovation for Sophie, for the girl in the simple white dress. Clara Jensen was on her feet, applauding with tears in her eyes. Principal Thompson stood looking stunned. Even Madison's parents were standing looking at their daughter like they'd just realized something. Sophie stood there overwhelmed. The sound washed over her applause, cheers, whistles. She couldn't process it, couldn't understand it. She just looked at Mom. Mom was crying, smiling, clapping so hard her hands had to hurt. She mouthed something Sophie couldn't hear over the noise. "I love you." Sophie's own tears came then, hot and fast and relieved. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Principal Thompson walked onto the stage with the microphone. The applause gradually died down as people returned to their seats. "Well," he said, his voice thick, "that was... I don't have words. Sophie Lane, everyone." More applause. Sophie wiped her eyes. "We'll take a brief intermission while the judges deliberate," Thompson announced. "Results in 15 minutes." Sophie walked off stage on shaking legs. Miss Harper met her in the wings and pulled her into a fierce hug. "You were magnificent, absolutely magnificent. I thought I was going to pass out. But you didn't. You sang like an angel." Other performers crowded around. Rachel hugged her. A boy named Daniel gave her a high five. Even some of the kids who'd never spoken to her before offered congratulations. Madison stood off to the side watching. When Sophie's eyes met hers, Madison didn't look away. She just nodded. Once, a tiny acknowledgement. Sophie nodded back. The 15-minute intermission felt like hours. Sophie went to the bathroom, splashed water on her face, tried to calm down. She didn't let herself think about the prize money yet. Didn't want to jinx it. When she came out, Mom was waiting in the hallway. They hugged without speaking. Sometimes words weren't enough. "You were perfect, baby," Mom whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "I was so scared." "I know, but you did it anyway. That's what courage is." The loudspeaker crackled. All performers back to the auditorium for results. Sophie's stomach flipped. This was it. They walked back together. The auditorium had refilled, everyone buzzing with energy. Sophie found her place with the other performers on the side of the stage. Principal Thompson took the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen, our judges have reached a decision. This year's competition was exceptional, and every single performer should be proud." He paused for effect. Third place for her beautiful ballet performance, Chloe Anderson. Applause. Chloe went up to receive a small trophy and a $50 gift card. Second place for her vocal performance, Madison Bennett. More applause. Madison walked up smiling, but Sophie could see the tightness around her eyes. She'd expected to win. Sophie's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. And first place, Thompson drew it out, for a performance that touched every heart in this room, Sophie Lane. The auditorium erupted. Sophie stood frozen. First place. She'd won. She'd actually won. Miss Harper pushed her gently toward the stage. Sophie walked out her legs, barely supporting her. Thompson handed her the trophy, bigger than the others, shiny and real. Then he handed her an envelope. $500, he said quietly. "Well earned." Sophie took it with trembling hands. $500. Medicine for Mom. Time to breathe. The audience stood again, applauding. Sophie looked out and found Mom, who was crying and smiling and clapping like her life depended on it. Sophie held up the envelope, showing Mom. Mom's hand went to her heart. The applause continued. Sophie stood there holding the trophy and the envelope, feeling like she was in a dream. But then something unexpected happened. A woman Sophie didn't recognize walked up to the stage. She was in her 40s, dressed professionally with kind eyes. Principal Thompson looked surprised but handed her the microphone. "Hello," the woman said. "My name is Clara Jensen. I'm the music director of the Austin Youth Philharmonic, and I'm also on the board of Emerson Music Academy." The auditorium quieted, confused. "I came tonight to watch my daughter perform cello," Clara continued. "But I heard something else, something extraordinary." She looked directly at Sophie. "Young lady, I've been working in music for 25 years. I've trained at Juilliard, conducted in concert halls across the country, and I can honestly say that what you did tonight, that level of emotional authenticity, is something I can't teach. It's a gift." Sophie's mouth went dry. "I'd like to invite you to my studio next week for a formal audition. I want to record your voice and send it to Emerson Music Academy. They have a full scholarship program for gifted students, and I believe you'd be an excellent candidate." The auditorium buzzed. Sophie heard gasps, whispers. "Would you be interested?" Clara asked gently. Sophie looked at Mom. Mom looked shocked, overwhelmed. Yes." Sophie's voice came out as a question. Clara smiled. "Wonderful. I'll speak with your mother after the ceremony. We'll arrange everything." She handed the microphone back to Thompson and stepped off the stage. Sophie stood there, clutching the trophy and envelope, her mind spinning. A scholarship to a music academy. This wasn't just $500 anymore. This was everything changing. The ceremony wrapped up. Students and parents flooded the lobby. Sophie found herself surrounded by people she'd never spoken to, all offering congratulations. Clara Jensen found Mom in the crowd. Sophie watched as they talked, as Clara handed Mom a business card, as Mom's expression shifted from shock to hope to something like joy. When Mom came back over, she pulled Sophie aside. "Baby, do you know what this means?" "Not really. It means you could go to a real music school, get real training. It means—" Mom's voice broke. It means you could have opportunities I never dreamed of. But the $500 is wonderful, and we'll use it for the medicine I need. But Sophie, this is bigger than that. Mom cupped Sophie's face in her hands. This is your future. Sophie looked down at the envelope in her hands. $500 that could save Mom in the short term, and a business card that could change everything in the long term. She'd walked onto that stage hoping to win enough money for medicine. She was walking off with the possibility of an entirely different life. "What do I do?" Sophie whispered. Mom smiled through her tears. "You go to that audition, you sing, and you let yourself dream bigger than we ever have before." The parking lot was emptying when Clara Jensen approached them again. Sophie was still holding the trophy, the envelope, and the weight of what had just happened. "Mrs. Lane, do you have a moment?" Mom straightened up, suddenly conscious of her worn cardigan next to Clara's tailored blazer. "Of course." Clara smiled warmly, sensing the discomfort. "I wanted to explain the program in more detail. May we sit?" They found a bench outside the auditorium. Clara sat between Sophie and her mom, completely at ease. "Emerson Music Academy runs a summer intensive program," Clara began. 6 weeks of training in vocal performance, music theory, and stagecraft. It's usually quite expensive, but they offer full scholarships to exceptional students. Room, board, instruction, everything covered. Mom's hand went to her throat. Everything. Everything. The Academy believes that talent shouldn't be limited by financial circumstances. Clara looked at Sophie. "I'd like to record you next week at my studio. If the board hears what I heard tonight, I'm confident they'll offer you a spot." Sophie's mind raced. 6 weeks away from home, 6 weeks of real music training, but 6 weeks away from Mom. "When would this be?" Mom asked. "The program runs from mid-June through July. Students live on campus, but family can visit on weekends. And it truly costs us nothing." Mom's voice was careful, like she was afraid of the answer. "Nothing. In fact, there's something else." Clara hesitated. "I noticed during your performance, Mrs. Lane, that you were coughing. If you don't mind me asking." Mom's face reddened. "Just asthma. Nothing serious. The Academy has an on-site health clinic. It serves the families of scholarship students. If Sophie is accepted, you'd have access to medical care. No cost." The words hung in the air. Medical care. No cost. Sophie watched her mom's expression shift, shocked disbelief. "Hope." "I don't understand," Mom said quietly. "Why would they do that?" "Because they understand that students perform best when they're not worried about their families. It's part of their mission." Clara pulled out a folder from her bag. "Here's information about the program. Take it home, read it over, discuss it. Then call me next week, and we'll schedule the recording session." She stood, handed the folder to Mom. "Sophie, you have something rare, something precious. Don't let it go to waste." After Clara left, Sophie and Mom sat on the bench in silence. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Just them and the distant sound of car doors, engines starting. "Mom," Sophie said finally. "Yeah, baby." "What just happened?" Mom laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. I think the door just opened." They went home. Sophie changed out of the white dress and into her pajamas. Mom made tea. They sat at the small kitchen table and opened Clara's folder. Inside were brochures, applications, testimonials from previous scholarship students. Photos of the Academy, a beautiful campus with modern buildings and practice rooms. It looked like another world. "Listen to this," Mom read aloud. "The Emerson Music Academy believes that every talented student deserves the opportunity to develop their gifts regardless of economic background. Our scholarship program is designed to identify and nurture young artists who might otherwise never have access to professional training." Sophie looked at the photos. Kids her age, but dressed differently, carrying instrument cases, looking confident. Could she be one of them? "What do you think?" Mom asked. "I think it's scary." "Good scary or bad scary?" Sophie considered. "Both." Mom reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to decide tonight. Clara said to call her next week. We have time." But Sophie was thinking about the $500 sitting in the envelope on the counter. "Mom, I won that money for you, for your medicine." "I know you did." Mom's eyes were bright. "And we'll use it. I'll finally go to the doctor, get proper prescriptions." "But Sophie, this opportunity, it's bigger than $500. It's your whole future." "But what if I'm not good enough? What if I get there and everyone's better than me?" "Then you'll learn. That's what schools are for." Mom squeezed her hand. "Baby, I've watched you your whole life try to make yourself smaller. quieter, like you don't deserve to take up space. But tonight, you stood on that stage and filled the whole room with your voice. You deserve this. Sophie felt tears coming again. I'm scared. Of course you are. Anything worth doing is scary. They went to bed late, both too wired to sleep. Sophie lay in her small room staring at the trophy on her dresser. First place. She'd actually won. And now this, a chance at something she'd never even dared to imagine. On Monday, Sophie returned to school a different person. Not visibly, she wore the same clothes, carried the same backpack. But something had shifted. Kids she'd never talked to stopped her in the hallway to say they'd watched the performance online. Someone had recorded it. Rachel found her at lunch and asked to sit together. And Madison was different too. She didn't apologize, didn't suddenly become Sophie's best friend. But when they passed in the hallway, she nodded, a small acknowledgement that something had changed between them. Miss Harper pulled Sophie aside after school. Have you decided about the recording session? I think so. Mom and I are going to call Clara tonight. Good, Miss Harper smiled. You belong in that program, Sophie. Don't doubt that for a second. That evening, Mom dialed Clara's number. Put it on speaker. Clara Jensen. Hi, this is Maria Lane, Sophie's mother. Mrs. Lane, I'm so glad you called. Have you had a chance to review the materials? Mom looked at Sophie, who nodded. We have, and we'd like to schedule the recording session. Wonderful. How's this Saturday, say 10 a.m.? That works. Clara gave them the studio address in Austin, about an hour's drive. They confirmed the time and hung up. Sophie felt her stomach flip. Saturday. 3 days away. We should celebrate, Mom said suddenly. Celebrate what? Everything. You won first place. You got $500. You might get into a music academy. Mom stood up. Come on, let's go get ice cream. Mom, we shouldn't spend. We're getting ice cream. Mom's voice was firm. Some things are worth celebrating properly. They drove to the Dairy Queen 2 miles away, ordered small cones, sat in the car eating them, watching the sunset. You know what I keep thinking about, Mom said. What? When you were little, maybe 4 or 5, you used to sing all the time. Made up these little songs about everything. Birds, clouds, your toys. Mom smiled at the memory. Your dad, before he left, he used to say you had music in your soul. Sophie had almost no memories of her father. He'd left when she was 6. I never told you this, Mom continued, but after he left, you stopped singing. Just stopped like someone had turned off a switch. It broke my heart. I don't remember that. I know, but I do. And tonight, watching you on that stage, Mom's voice cracked. It was like watching that little girl come back, the one who sang about everything, the one who wasn't afraid to make noise. Sophie didn't know what to say. Promise me something, Mom said. What? Promise me you won't make yourself small anymore. Whatever happens, academy or not, promise me you'll keep singing, keep taking up space. Sophie looked at her mom. Really looked. Saw the gray threads in her hair, the lines around her eyes, the exhaustion that never quite went away. Saw the hope there, too. I promise, Sophie said. Saturday came fast. They left at 8 a.m., Mom's Honda rattling its way toward Austin. Sophie wore the white dress again. It felt right somehow. The studio was in a converted warehouse, industrial but welcoming. Clara met them at the door. You found it. Come in, come in. Inside was a revelation. Soundproof rooms with professional equipment, a grand piano, walls covered in photos of performances and students. This is incredible, Mom breathed. Thank you. I've been running this studio for 15 years. Clara led them to the main recording room. Sophie, have you ever been recorded before? No, ma'am. Don't worry. It's simple. You'll stand at this microphone, put on these headphones, and sing just like you did Friday night. My engineer Marcus will handle the technical side. Marcus waved from behind the glass. Young guy, early 20s, wearing a band t-shirt. What should I sing? Sophie asked. Scarborough Fair. The same arrangement. What made you special on Friday wasn't the song choice, it was how you sang it. Sophie stepped up to the microphone. Put on the headphones. The world went quiet except for her own breathing. Through the glass, she could see Clara, Marcus, and Mom watching. Whenever you're ready. Clara's voice came through the headphones. Sophie closed her eyes. Thought about everything that had led here. The trailer park, the bakery, Mom's coughing, the $500, Madison's smirk, the standing ovation, all of it. And she sang. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? The microphone caught everything. Every breath, every inflection, every emotion. It was exposing in a way the stage hadn't been. nowhere to hide. But Sophie didn't want to hide anymore. She sang it through start to finish. When the last note faded, she opened her eyes. Through the glass, Marcus was staring at his equipment like it had betrayed him. Mom had tears running down her face, and Clara was smiling. "Perfect!" Clara's voice came through. "Absolutely perfect! Marcus, tell me you got that!" "Every note." Marcus sounded awed. "Best recording I've done all year." Clara came into the room. "Sophie, I'm going to send this to the Academy Board tomorrow. I can't make promises, but I'd be shocked if they didn't offer you a spot." "Really? Really?" Clara looked at Mom. "Mrs. Lane, your daughter is extraordinarily gifted. You should be very proud." "I am," Mom said, "more than she knows." They left the studio an hour later. The recording was done, sent out of their hands now. All they could do was wait. The letter came on a Tuesday. Sophie saw it first, a thick cream envelope with the Emerson Music Academy seal. Her hands shook as she handed it to Mom. "Open it," Sophie said. "I can't." Mom carefully tore the envelope, pulled out the letter. Read. Her face went through a dozen expressions in 5 seconds. What does it say?" Mom looked up, tears streaming. "You're in. Full scholarship. 6 weeks, all expenses paid." Sophie grabbed the letter. Read the words herself to make sure they were real. "Dear Miss Lane, we are pleased to offer you." It was real. She was going. The next 2 weeks were a blur. Paperwork, medical forms, packing lists. Mom used the prize money to finally see a doctor who prescribed new medication and a treatment plan. Within days, her breathing improved. Everything was falling into place. Too perfectly, Sophie thought sometimes, like it couldn't possibly last. The night before she left for Emerson, Sophie couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room, listening to the familiar sounds of the trailer, the hum of the old refrigerator, Mom's even breathing through the wall. Tomorrow she'd be somewhere completely different. They left at dawn. The drive to Emerson took 3 hours. Mom's Honda loaded with Sophie's single suitcase and a backpack. The campus appeared through the trees like something from a movie. Sprawling lawns, brick buildings, students everywhere. "This is it," Mom said quietly. They followed signs to the registration building. Inside, families clustered well-dressed parents with expensive luggage kids who looked comfortable and confident. Sophie felt suddenly acutely aware of her worn suitcase and Mom's old Honda parked outside. Sophie Lane. A woman at the registration desk smiled. "Welcome, you're in Harmony Hall room 214. Your roommate is already moved in." They followed a student volunteer across campus. Sophie tried not to stare at everything, the practice rooms with grand pianos, the concert hall, the students walking with instrument cases. Harmony Hall was beautiful, modern, and clean. The volunteer led them to room 214 and knocked. The door opened. A girl their age stood there, blonde, preppy clothes, designer sneakers. "Hi, I'm Grace. You must be Sophie." "Yeah, hi." Come in." Grace stepped aside. The room was bigger than Sophie expected. 2 beds, 2 desks, a shared bathroom. Grace's side was already decorated with photos and posters. Sophie's side was bare. "I heard your audition recording," Grace said as Sophie set down her suitcase. "It was incredible. Like I've been taking voice lessons since I was 7, and I don't sound like that." Sophie didn't know what to say. "Your mom helped you move in." Grace smiled at Maria. "Hi, Mrs. Lane. I'm Grace Martinez. My dad's a music producer in L.A. "Nice to meet you," Mom said politely. They spent an hour unpacking Sophie's few belongings. Grace chattered the whole time about the program, the teachers, what to expect. She was friendly. Almost too friendly. Sophie kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. When it was time for Mom to leave, Sophie walked her back to the car. "You going to be okay?" Mom asked. "I think so." "Grace seems nice." "Yeah." Sophie hesitated. "Mom, everyone here is so polished. What if I don't fit?" Mom turned to face her. "Listen to me. You fit. You earned your spot here same as everyone else. Maybe you don't have designer clothes or private lessons, but you have something they don't." "What?" "Heart." Mom pulled her close. "Don't forget that." They hugged for a long time. Then Mom got in the car and drove away. Sophie stood there until the Honda disappeared, then walked back to Harmony Hall. Grace was sitting on her bed scrolling her phone. "Your mom seems really sweet." "She is." "So orientation starts in an hour. We should probably change." Sophie looked down at her jeans and t-shirt. "Change into what?" "I don't know, something nice. Everyone dresses up for the first day." Sophie opened her suitcase. She had 3 outfits. None of them qualified as nice by Emerson standards. She pulled out her least worn jeans and a clean shirt. Grace appeared beside her. "Hey, if you want to borrow something, I'm fine." Sophie's voice came out sharper than intended. Grace stepped back. "Okay, sure." They walked to orientation together but didn't talk much. The assembly hall was full of students and faculty. Sophie found a seat near the back, watched as kids greeted each other clearly, already knowing each other from previous programs or connections. She was the only scholarship student in her year, the only one who came from nothing. The feeling of not belonging settled over her like a heavy coat. After orientation, they had their first masterclass, vocal performance with a famous tenor named Nathan Brooks. 20 students sat in a semicircle while Nathan talked about technique, breath support, emotional connection. "Let's hear what we're working with," he said finally. "Who wants to go first?" Several hands shot up. Nathan pointed to a boy in the front row. "Go ahead." The boy sang an art song in Italian. Perfect diction, perfect pitch, clearly extensively trained. Next was a girl who did a musical theater piece, belted it with professional-level skill. One by one, students performed. Each one impressive, prepared, expensive. Then Nathan pointed at Sophie. "You, let's hear what you've got." Sophie's mouth went dry. "What should I sing?" "Whatever you want, just something that shows your range." She stood, walked to the front, thought about what to sing. Not Scarborough Fair. Everyone had already heard that on her audition. She thought about Mom, about early mornings, about hope. "You are my sunshine," she said. A few students snickered. It was a children's song. Too simple. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Interesting choice. Go ahead." Sophie closed her eyes. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." She sang it the way Mom used to sing it to her when she was little, not as a happy song, but as a lullaby, gentle and aching and full of love. "You make me happy when skies are gray." The room went quiet. Sophie opened her eyes. The students who'd been smirking had stopped. Nathan was watching her intently. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." She thought about leaving Mom this morning, about how small she'd looked driving away in that old Honda. "Please don't take my sunshine away." The last note faded. Sophie stood there feeling exposed. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "That," he said finally, "is what we call artistry. Technique can be taught. Soul cannot." He looked around the room. "Most of you have had years of expensive training, and that's valuable. But this young woman just did something none of you did. She made me feel the song." Sophie's face burned. She sat down quickly. Grace leaned over. "That was amazing," she whispered. After class, several students approached Sophie, introduced themselves, asked where she'd studied. "I haven't," Sophie admitted. "Not formally." They looked at her like she was some kind of curiosity, a novelty. That night, Grace tried again. "So where are you from?" "Texas, small town." "Do you have siblings?" "No, just me and my mom." "What does your mom do?" Sophie hesitated. "She runs a small bakery." Grace's face lit up. "Oh, that's so cool, like a boutique artisan place." "Not exactly. More like bread and pastries for the neighborhood." "Still cool, though." Sophie wasn't sure Grace understood, but she appreciated the effort. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Sophie struggled with sight reading and music theory, things other students had learned years ago. But when it came to performance, to connecting with a song emotionally, she excelled. In theory class, she felt stupid. In performance class, she felt powerful. The dissonance was exhausting. One afternoon, Sophie was practicing in an empty room when Grace found her. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure." Grace sat down. "How do you do it? Make songs feel so real?" "I don't know. I just think about what they mean." "But like specifically, when you sang 'You Are My Sunshine,' what were you thinking about?" Sophie considered lying, but Grace had been nothing but kind. "My mom. How much I miss her. How scared I am that something will happen to her while I'm here." Grace was quiet. "My dad's never home. He's always working on some project. Sometimes I forget what he looks like." She smiled sadly. "I can sing about missing someone. I just don't feel it. Not like you do." "Maybe that's okay. Maybe your strength is different. Maybe." Grace stood. "Want to practice sight reading together? You help me with emotional stuff. I'll help you with theory." Sophie smiled. "Yeah, that'd be good." They became friends after that. Real friends. Grace introduced Sophie to other students, helped her navigate the social landscape, explained the unspoken rules of a place like Emerson, and slowly Sophie started to feel less like an outsider. 3 weeks into the program, they had another masterclass. This time, the assignment was to choose a song that represented who they were. Sophie chose Scarborough Fair again, but this time she knew what she wanted to say with it. When her turn came, she stood in front of the class. "This song is about impossible tasks," she said, "about being asked to do things you don't think you can do, and doing them anyway." She sang. This time she wasn't nervous, wasn't scared, she was just honest. The performance was different from her audition, stronger, more controlled, but still emotional. When she finished, Nathan stood up. "That's the difference between 3 weeks ago and now. You're learning to combine technique with soul. That's the goal." After class, a student named Ethan approached her. "That was really moving," he said. "I teared up. Thanks. Can I ask, why did you choose that song?" Sophie thought about it. "Because it reminds me where I come from and who I'm doing this for." Word spread about Sophie's performances. Students started requesting to hear her sing. Faculty noticed, but Sophie also noticed something else: how hard Grace and the others worked on their technique, how much they'd sacrificed to be here too. They weren't her enemies. They were just different. On Friday night of the 4th week, Grace convinced Sophie to come to a student gathering in the common room. "It's just people hanging out playing music. Low-key." Sophie went, sat on the floor while students passed around a guitar, taking turns playing. When the guitar came to her, she shook her head. "I don't play." "Sing something a cappella then," someone suggested. Sophie thought for a moment, then started singing Amazing Grace. Not the traditional version, a stripped-down, soulful version she'd heard once and never forgotten. The room went still, everyone listening. When she finished, Ethan said, "You know what's crazy? That song is like 200 years old, but the way you sang it, it felt new." "That's because she means it," Grace said. "She's not performing, she's testifying." Sophie looked at her roommate, surprised. Grace shrugged. "I've been paying attention." The gathering continued late into the night. For the first time since arriving, Sophie felt like she belonged. She called Mom the next morning. "How is it?" Mom asked. "Hard, really hard, but good." Sophie paused. "I think I'm figuring it out." "Figuring what out?" "How to be myself here, how to learn from them without losing what makes me, me." Mom's voice was warm. "That's exactly right, baby. That's exactly right. How's your breathing?" "So much better. The new medicine is working. I can actually sleep through the night now." Relief flooded through Sophie. "Good. That's good." "2 more weeks," Mom said. "Then I'll see you at the final performance." "You're coming." "Of course I'm coming. Wouldn't miss it for the world." They talked for another hour. Sophie told her about Grace, about the classes, about feeling less alone. When she hung up, she felt lighter. The last 2 weeks flew by. Intensive rehearsals for the final showcase. Students practicing until late, helping each other, forming bonds. Sophie spent hours in practice rooms working on her piece for the final performance. Nathan had suggested she do "You Are My Sunshine" again, but arranged differently. More complex, more mature. Sophie had a better idea. She'd do "You Are My Sunshine," but blend it with elements of Scarborough Fair. Create something that was entirely hers. Grace helped her work out the arrangement. Ethan offered feedback. Even students who'd initially seemed standoffish became supportive. The night before the final performance, Sophie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, nervous and excited and terrified. "You're going to be amazing tomorrow," Grace said from across the room. "How do you know?" "Because you always are. When you sing, you're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be true. That's rarer." Sophie smiled in the dark. "Thanks. I'm glad you're my roommate." "Me too." Tomorrow, Mom would be in the audience. Tomorrow, Sophie would perform in front of everyone who mattered. Tomorrow, she'd show them what 6 weeks at Emerson had taught her: not how to be someone else, but how to be more fully herself. The concert hall blazed with light. 600 seats all filled. Parents, faculty, board members. The final showcase was always the biggest event of the summer program. Backstage, Sophie adjusted the dress. Grace had loaned her a simple navy blue that fit perfectly. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup except a touch of lip gloss Grace had insisted on. She looked different than she had 6 weeks ago. Not in appearance, but in the way she carried herself. Shoulders back, head up. "You ready?" Grace asked, wearing her own performance dress. "Nervous?" "Good nervous or bad nervous?" "Both." The showcase would feature all 20 students. Sophie was scheduled to perform last, the closing number. Nathan had chosen the order specifically. The finale should leave them breathless, he'd said. Sophie, that's you. The house lights dimmed. Principal Chen walked onto the stage to welcome everyone. Sophie peeked through the curtains, scanning the audience. There, fifth row center. Mom sat in a simple dress Sophie had never seen before. She must have bought it for tonight. Next to her was an empty seat. Sophie frowned. Who was Mom saving a seat for? Then she saw Clara Jensen walk down the aisle and sit beside Mom. They smiled at each other, clearly already acquainted. Sophie's heart swelled. Clara had come. The performances began. One by one, students took the stage. Arias, art songs, musical theater pieces. Each one polished and professional. Grace performed Somewhere Over the Rainbow, with technique so perfect it was almost clinical. But Sophie could hear the difference from 6 weeks ago. There was emotion there now, too. Grace had learned. Ethan sang a jazz standard that brought the house down. Then it was Sophie's turn. Nathan walked to the microphone. Our final performer of the evening has been a revelation this summer. When she arrived, she had raw talent and little technical training. 6 weeks later, she's developed into an artist who reminds us why we do this work. He paused. Please welcome Sophie Lane. Applause filled the hall. Sophie walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, but not blinding. She could see faces now. Mom in the fifth row, tears already streaming. Clara beside her, smiling encouragement. Other faces too. Grace and Ethan in the wings giving her thumbs up. Faculty members she'd worked with. Students who'd become friends. Sophie stood center stage and waited for the applause to die down. Silence settled. This summer, Sophie began her voice steady. I learned a lot about music, about technique and theory and breath support. She smiled. But I also learned that the best performances come from truth. So tonight I'm singing something true. She took a breath. This is for my mom, who taught me that love means singing even when it hurts. She began. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. But different than before. The melody intertwined with fragments of Scarborough Fair parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, woven through the verses like a thread. The arrangement was complex, the kind of thing she couldn't have done 6 weeks ago. But she'd learned, grown. You make me happy when skies are gray. Sophie let her voice soar on happy, then brought it down to something intimate on gray, playing with dynamics, with emotion, with everything Nathan had taught her. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. She looked directly at Mom while singing that line, saw Mom's hand go to her heart, the same gesture from months ago. Then Sophie shifted, incorporated a verse of Scarborough Fair. Remember me to one who lives there. The two songs became one. Past and present, longing and love all blended together. In the audience, people sat motionless. Transfixed. Clara leaned toward Mom and whispered something. Mom nodded, wiping tears. Sophie brought it back to You Are My Sunshine for the final verse. The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping. Her voice was fuller now, supported by months of technique, but the emotion was still raw, still real. I dreamed I held you in my arms. She thought about the trailer park, the bakery, the early mornings, about how far she'd come and how much farther she had to go. When I awoke, dear, I was mistaken. Voice breaking deliberately on mistaken, a choice, not an accident. So I hung my head and I cried. The final chorus. Sophie gave it everything, all the technique, all the emotion, all the growth of 6 weeks, compressed into one moment. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. The hall was so quiet you could hear breathing. You make me happy when skies are gray. Building swelling, letting her voice fill every corner. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. She held the love note, let it ring pure and clear. Please don't take my sunshine away. The last word faded to silence. Sophie stood there, chest heaving, suddenly aware of how much she'd put into that performance. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Then the hall erupted. Not polite applause, not even enthusiastic applause. A standing ovation that started with Mom on her feet before anyone else, clapping so hard, crying so openly, and spread like wildfire. Clara stood, then the faculty, then students, parents, everyone. The applause was deafening. Sophie looked at Mom, who was mouthing something. I love you. I'm so proud. Sophie felt tears on her own face. She bowed, overwhelmed. The ovation continued. 1 minute, 2. People didn't sit back down. Finally, Nathan walked onto the stage. The applause gradually quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice thick, I've been teaching for 30 years, and that, he gestured to Sophie, that is why we do this. Thank you, Sophie. More applause. Sophie bowed again and walked off stage. Grace was waiting in the wings, crying. She pulled Sophie into a fierce hug. That was beautiful, so beautiful. The rest of the students clustered around, offering congratulations. Even the ones who'd been standoffish at first were genuine in their praise. After the ceremony ended, Sophie found Mom and Clara in the lobby. Mom hugged her so tight Sophie could barely breathe. "Baby, that was... I don't have words." "You gave me the words, Mom. You've always given me the words." Clara smiled. "Sophie, may I speak with both of you privately?" They found a quiet corner. Clara pulled out a folder. The Academy Board was here tonight. They wanted to see the students in person before making final decisions about year-long scholarships. She paused. "Sophie, they'd like to offer you a full scholarship for the academic year, tuition room, and board, all expenses covered." Sophie's mouth fell open. "The whole year? The whole year? You've proven you can do the work. More importantly, you've proven you have something unique to offer." Mom's hand went to her mouth. There's more," Clara said gently. "The Academy has family housing on campus, small apartments for scholarship families. Mrs. Lane, if you'd like, you and Sophie could both live there. You'd have access to the health clinic, and there are part-time jobs available in the campus bakery if you're interested." Sophie turned to Mom. Mom was crying too hard to speak. She just nodded. "I'll take that as a yes," Clara said warmly. "We'll handle all the arrangements. Sophie starts in September." After Clara left, Mom and Sophie sat on a bench outside the concert hall. "I can't believe this is real," Sophie said. "I can." Mom put her arm around her daughter. "You worked so hard for this. You earned it. We earned it. If you hadn't taught me to sing, if you hadn't sacrificed so much. That's what mothers do." Mom smiled through tears. "And now I get to watch you grow even more. See where this gift takes you." They sat there as other families filtered past, everyone heading to their cars. "Mom," Sophie said. "Yeah. Are you scared moving to a new place, leaving the bakery?" Mom was quiet for a moment, terrified, but also excited. "I've spent so long just trying to survive. Maybe it's time to actually live." They drove back to the trailer park that night. Tomorrow they'd start packing. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight they sat in their small kitchen, and Mom made tea, and they talked about the future like it was something bright instead of something scary. "What do you think you'll study?" Mom asked. "Everything. I want to learn everything." Sophie paused. "But I also want to remember where I came from, who I'm singing for." "Good. Never forget that." 13 years later, Sophie stood in her dressing room at Madison Square Garden. 25 years old, her first headlining concert sold out. A knock on the door. "5 minutes, Miss Lane." Sophie looked at herself in the mirror. Designer dress, professional makeup, styled hair. She'd come so far from the trailer park. But before every show, she did the same thing. Dot. She closed her eyes and hummed. Just a few bars of Scarborough Fair Dot. To remember Dot, another knock. "It's time." Sophie walked through the corridor to the stage entrance. She could hear the crowd, 15,000 people. Then she saw her. Mom backstage in the VIP area, healthy and happy, and so proud. Dot, they hugged briefly. "Break a leg, baby." "Thanks, Mom." Sophie walked onto the stage. The roar of the crowd was overwhelming. She took her place center stage and waited for them to quiet. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said when she could finally be heard. "Before we begin, I want to tell you a story." The arena quieted. "When I was 12 years old, I lived in a trailer park in Texas. My mom ran a small bakery. We didn't have much money, but we had music." She let that hang in the air. "Someone asked me recently what moment changed my life. Was it the scholarship, the record deal, the awards?" Sophie shook her head. "None of those." She found Mom in the VIP section. "It was the moment my mother stood up in a crowded auditorium when I was 12. When I was just a girl from a trailer park in a wrinkled shirt, she stood up first. Before anyone else believed in me, she did." The arena was silent. "So, Mom, this first song is for you." She began to sing "You Are My Sunshine." 15,000 people watched as Sophie Lane, Grammy winner, platinum artist, international star, sang the same lullaby her mother had sung to her in a tiny trailer kitchen years ago. Dot. And in the VIP section, Mom stood up, hand on her heart, crying and smiling. Just like she had 13 years before. Dot. Some things never changed. The crowd joined in singing the chorus. The entire arena filled with voices, all because a 12-year-old girl once decided to sing from her heart. Sophie looked at Mom and smiled. All of this had started with love. And love was still all that mattered.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.